Fantastic, thank you. So I think you would all agree that we have had a remarkable day hearing from some of the leading voices, right? Leading voices, luminaires, and people who are accelerating smart, resilient, and sustainable futures. And our next speaker, first of all, needs no introduction. But he's our last speaker, and he really embodies the definition, in my opinion, of a thought leader and a pioneer in these fields. Paul Hawken is an environmentalist, he's an entrepreneur, he's an author, and has several different works that have really influenced myself, and I'm sure many of you all in this audience over the years. I was extremely excited when Sarah, myself, and Ron were planning this event early on. I think we caught it early in 2017, and we started to throw out some, rock star names, and Paul came to the top. I was like, we need to see if we can get Paul Hawken here, and she was like, let's see if we can reach out, and we are so honored to have Paul in the room. Paul has authored over seven different books, countless op-eds and articles, and some of them, I wanted to mention three that have really influenced me. One of them is Ecology of Commerce, this roadmap to a sustainable global economy, which I think was remarkable. Natural Capitalism, really about creating the next industrial revolution. And the other one was Blessed Unrest, this movement that he talked about of involving the environmental, the social justice, and the indigenous rights community who are coming together in this movement that is moving us forward. Most recently, as many of you probably know, Paul has co-authored and led the Project Drawdown, an effort considered the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming by bringing hundreds of experts and scientists from around the world together to determine what those top solutions are that we as local governments, as business leaders, as nonprofits, as people in civil society can begin moving forward to achieve that sustainable future. So without further intro, let's give Paul a warm welcome to the Sustainability Symposium. Thank you for being here. Woo, woo.
I was joking with Sarah. I said, Paul needs no introduction. You should get up here. Thank you for the introduction, Chris. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Laura. And thank you, Governor O'Malley, who is one of our esteemed board of directors on Project Drawdown from the beginning. So thank you all, and thank you for being here today. Drawdown. Drawdown is, let me see if this works. Do I point it somewhere, or what's that? Well, AV will do a quick. But I can talk about Drawdown. Project Drawdown started really in 2001, and it started after the third assessment came out from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and as you know, each assessment is a little bit more pessimistic than the former one. Primarily because it's consensus science, and there's no such thing as consensus science. Science is evidentiary. So consensus science meant that the science was suppressed by the Saudis and the Russians and the Venezuelans and everybody, so to tamp down basically the predictions that were coming forward from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is organized to study the impact of climate change. It is the most robust scientific endeavor humankind has ever done. There's 2.5 billion data points behind the last fifth assessment, and is the most outstanding problem statement I think that humanity has ever come up with, okay? So the third assessment came in 2001. In 2001, as some of you may remember, the famous global wedges came out from the Carbon Mitigation Project at Princeton. And that described 8 wedges, which were comprised of a combination of 15 solutions that, if were undertaken, could stabilize emissions by 2050. And there was a lot of excitement about it. The idea of a wedge came in to common parlance. I don't know if nature has any wedges, but I know there's a nice shoe, but it's like this idea that there was a little piece of pie that we could, put in there came out. And I think it was very popular because there was really like, okay, we can do this. I looked at it, and of those 15 solutions, 11 could only be done by and implemented by the boards of directors of very large conservative corporations. 11 of the 15. 8 of them had to be utilities, 1 an energy company, 1 had to be a car company, and 1 of them had to be a appliance company, or multiple appliance companies or car companies. But every one of the 11 was underwater financially. And so what we are saying is our future depended on the boards of directors who by nature and by definition are much more conservative than the companies they are directors of, would have to basically spend down their balance sheet and basically be fiduciarily irresponsible. And if they did that, we might have some hope. And I thought, this does not give me hope. And we're ready to go? Okay, I'm just see if it works. Okay, it works. And thank you so much, Sarah. And so this is when Drawdown started. And what I did was I went around to big NGOs and institutions and said, where do we stand? I want to know where we stand. I mean, is it game over? Are we like cooked? Or do we have a chance here? Because that study from Princeton, which I call rectangle learning, only something that could come out from studying a screen all day, as opposed to being in the world itself, doesn't give me any sense that we have an opportunity here to address it. And second, what I wanted to do was name the goal. And to this day, the goal is what? What is the goal around climate change? Mitigation, right? I mean, there's other words, but mitigation. Can anybody define mitigation for me? Yes, less what? Exactly, less bad. It means to reduce the pain and seriousness of something. And I thought, what an underwhelming goal. So let's just make it a little bit less bad or serious than it would be otherwise if we didn't do something. It's like, is that a goal for anything? For your business? For your relationship? Who wants to mitigate? I think they meant militate, by the way, but I guess they got, I'm an English major, so that actually affects me, the language. So to name the goal and then to determine whether we had the means at hand in 2001 to actually accomplish it. I just wanted to know. I think everybody would have wanted to know at that time who was literate and knew about the situation, the problem at hand. And what happened is that I got feedback that said, great idea, good on you. We don't know how to do that. That's not our expertise. And they said, why don't you do it? I said, that is not my expertise either. And I kept sort of trying to sell it, and nobody bought. And then I slowly forgot about it until 2013, when Bill McKibben came out with his famous piece in Rolling Stone, which is called Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. And if you read it, you know the title was accurate. And he took Mark Campanelli's work at Carbon Tracker in London and basically made poetry out of it in Mark's word. And Mark Campanelli was a financial analyst before he went to Carbon Tracker, and he analyzed the balance sheets of coal, gas, and oil companies and looked at their reserves, their deposits of coal, gas, and oil, and determined, of course, that the bulk of them were unburnable carbon. That is to say that if they were combusted, we would be Venus. So therefore, they're not an asset. What Bill McKibben did in his 2013 piece is burn it. And it was terrifying. And I had people come to me who I'd known for a long time who had been were very effective as activists in the world of climate and say, it's game over. I'm giving up. And I thought, wow. I mean, that wasn't a very satisfying thing for me to hear. And these, like, I'm going to move to Canada. That was I heard that twice, I'm going to go to Canada, take my kids, get a little farm in the Squamish Valley. They had these ideas of what they were going to do, but they were giving up is the point. And it occurred to me then that when it's game over, because several of them said it's game over, they use exactly the same language. That when it's game over, it's actually game on. It's the opposite. It's when we surrender, when we give up, when we, personally in our lives, when that happens, oftentimes there's an opening there that wasn't there when we thought we knew what we're supposed to do, or our ego was taking over, that there was a kind of receptivity, and that's when I decided to start Drawdown, okay? Still didn't have the expertise and know how to do what we did, but nevertheless, decided to start it anyway. That's Project Drawdown. Different clicker. Thank you. I'll make sure I don't get them mixed up here. And so Project Drawdown started with a very small a group of people, but I want to go to this one first. This may not work. Nope. Okay. But the one before was a movie, and basically what it showed is the North Eemian Ice Research Station in Greenland. And I went there in 2009 in a royal fact-finding tour with Danes, Swedes, and Norwegians. And there they drilled down through the ice and built up ice cores. They drilled from the ice sheet 2 miles down to a bedrock. And their purpose was to determine exactly the levels of CO2, sulfates, and other things in the atmosphere year by year for 125,000 years, which is when the Eemian period was. And it made a big impression on me just being there. First of all, it was like ridiculously cold. It made New York this week look like basically Key West. I mean, it was so cold, and it was summertime, and the conditions under which everyone worked there was extraordinary. But this is what the Eemian period looks like, and that's the last peak right there, not the one that's going straight up, that's us, but the one prior to that in the circle, that's the Eemian period 125,000 years ago. And we are told today that basically current levels of carbon, CO2 in the atmosphere is 407 ppm. The high, it vacillates within a year of about 6 to 7 ppm. But in fact, this is where we are. We're at 490 ppm. Because 407 only counts carbon dioxide. It does not count methane, nitrous oxide, and hydrofluorocarbons. If we put in all the greenhouse gases and their greenhouse warming potential in CO2 equivalents, we're at 490. And that dotted line is 300, represents 300 ppm. Humanity has never existed, the Homo genus, okay, us, for 2 million years, whether it's erectus or sapiens or whichever species of Homo you want to talk about, we've never been here over 300 ppm until 1939, okay? So this is terra nova. We don't know really what's going to happen at this level. We do know in the Eemian period, which you see right there, with a circle, that temperatures were 1 and 2 degrees Celsius higher than the pre-industrial period at the time. That we know. And what we also know is the ocean was 20 to 30 feet higher, that there was hippopotamus breeding in the Thames River Delta, that the water was so high that Sussex and Kent did not exist, that lions and giraffes were romping through Denmark and Germany, that crocodiles were going up the British Columbia coast to breed in Alaska. Okay, that's just 1 to 2 degrees higher, right? And so, again, it goes back to this concept of drawdown, which is drawdown means the first time on a year-to-year basis where greenhouse gases peak and go down. And that's the only goal that makes sense for humanity. Any other goal, to me, is just sort of avoidance, actually, or denial of a different type, really, which is, oh, well, let's do the best we can, or let's reduce, or we should curb our emissions. That's what you do to dogs in New York. You don't curb emissions. So this is, again, why drawdown is so important. And the thing I want to say about it is I feel like when you expand the goal, you open up possibility. There's this idea that you expand the goal makes it more difficult. I think it's the other way around. When you have a bigger goal, actually, it expands human imagination and possibility. because you think bigger. Like, well, let's not think about mitigation. Let's not think about curbing. Let's not think about, basically stabilization, another word, stabilize. There's no stability up there. 450, 500, there's no such thing as stabilization. We're already seeing that. We saw that in 2017. Do we consider weather stable right now? I don't think so. So this is how most people get the news about climate, not you, but it's important to understand how most of the world gets it, and it gets it from good science. The headlines are good science. They're meant to basically make the person really freak out, to adrenalize them, like, oh, shoot, really? And then with that, of course, is clickbait and things that give a false equivalency. Here we have the Tower Bridge being overwhelmed by higher ocean waters, and you have this thing about a woman basically killing her husband with a frog ornament and putting him in plastic sheeting for 18 years and mummifying him, And so this is really how most people get their climate information. And this is really important to understand because it produces an outcome. And here's another one. The headline is right. It's good science. It really is, okay? And here's another one. The Daily Mail, of course, is not known for its veracity, but nevertheless, the headline is correct. And at the same time, and I feel always a little uncomfortable saying this in front of Laura Seidel, but then they have Coca-Cola pouring it down a toilet, and actually, that is the right thing to do with Coca-Cola. 20 things you never knew you could do with Coca-Cola. Well, we know a really good thing. And it cleans it really well, by the way. And so at the same time, as an individual, you see these headlines, you go, I want to do something. I really do. I care. I have children, whatever. And so you Google, and if you Google the top whatever, 10, 20, 50 solutions to global warming or climate change, this is the top 2 you'll get. You'll get Scientific American and Union of Concerned Scientists. And Scientific American, if you read those, there's 5 more, there's 10 of them, are basically proverbs. Number 6 should be love your mother. And I mean, it's like forego fossil fuels. I dare anybody to do it for one day. Directly, indirectly. Try it. Yeah. So it's so move closer to work. I mean, everybody in the Bay Area is moving further away from work because they can't afford it. So these things just don't make sense for people. They look at it, and then on the right side, Union of Concerned Scientists, look at number 3. A power strip in your home entertainment center. Come on. I mean, so what happens when people read this is unless they have an IQ lower than basically room temperature, they know that these things are inadequate to the task at hand. The headlines they just read, they saw the Tower Bridge going down, and they're supposed to put a power strip in their home entertainment center. And what does an individual do then? They feel bad. They feel disempowered. They feel inadequate. They go into guilt. They go into shame. They can go into a lot of things, and none of them which are constructive or to the point. And so again, with Project Drawdown, where do we stand? I want to know is it game over? Maybe it is. Good to know, right? So, how to do it? Well, the first thing I realized that if a small NGO in Sausalito, California, came out with a plan to reverse global warming, it'd have all the credibility of a lentil. And it's like, thank you for sharing. And so we needed a research staff that was extraordinary in order for it to carry weight, to have gravitas. And so we put the word out to universities and institutions around the world asking for Drawdown fellows, and there they are. There's more of them than this. But we have about 70 research fellows from 22 countries, 6 continents, half PhDs, almost half women. It was a meritocracy. We didn't go by gender, but that's what it turned out to be. Let's talk about the movement of women into science is incredible, especially in countries like India and others. And all with double degrees, and these became our core researchers. Each took a solution or two, depending. And we also have an advisory board, and you recognize some of these names. There's 128 advisors from around the world. They advised us and went over content, our assumptions. And then we had 40 outside expert scientific reviewers who reviewed the models themselves, because we were modeling basically what? What we're modeling is the 100 most substantive solutions to reversing global warming. And those solutions had to be extant, they had to exist. They couldn't be wannabes, it could be should be's, if only be's. They had to exist. They had to be scaling, that is already growing on a year-to-year basis consistently. And they had to have robust scientific peer-reviewed literature behind them to basically measure their impact. So that was our criteria. And that's how we did it. We did the math. Very important. That's all we did. We did the math. On the carbon impact greenhouse gas side, peer-reviewed literature. On the economic side, which we also measured, and very important, we use only respected international institutions as our source of data. International Energy Agency, the World Bank, IPCC, FAO, Bloomberg Energy. That's it. No data, no inputs in our model are ours. None. None. It's not us. Drawdown reflected back to the world, reflects back to the world what we are doing and what we know. We're not trying to be right. We're not advocates in that sense. We're just saying, look at a smaller we, the 200 plus people that comprise Project Drawdown, are reflecting back to the larger we, you in this room and beyond. This is what we know and are doing right now. Do you understand what I'm saying? This isn't like, oh, do you feel bad? We should do this and we should do that. Of course, maybe we should, and I'm not sure we should or shouldn't feel bad. But the point is that form of communication doesn't really work. And so if you look at the book itself, and I'll show you just a run through some solutions quickly, you see impact, and that is CO2 equivalent. It can be other greenhouse gases, but we just make it simple there, CO2. And on the right side, and the impact is by either avoided emissions over 30 years or sequestered greenhouse gases, in which the case would be CO2. So we took these solutions and scaled them for 30 years. In other words, let's keep growing them. They're growing, let's keep growing them. What would happen if they continued to grow over 30 years? Could we achieve that point in time when emissions went down on a year-to-year basis? That's all we wanted to know. We didn't know going into it whether they would or wouldn't. And so on the right, you see the gigatons, that's million metric tons of reduced CO2 or CO2 equivalent, or sequestered CO2 in case of land use. And then you see net costs and net operating savings or costs. And this is measured against business as usual scenarios, which is where geothermal is applicable and implementable. What would be the alternative if you did not do geothermal? Will it be combined cycle gas or coal and such? So we went, compared it, and in those cases where geothermal is more practical, it is less expensive than combined cycle gas and coal at this time. And so it's a negative number, and the next number is the operating savings over, this got scrunched, isn't it? Those are 19 by 6 format. But anyway, this is scrunched, so it's over, but that's the savings over 30 years. $1.02 trillion. So this is afforestation, and I'm sorry that the slide is being a little scrunched. And again, number 15, you can see the gigatons, you can see the cost and the net savings. This is high-speed rail. Chinese and Japanese own this one right now. This is indigenous people's land management, and really, really important solution, because you can see that bottom right-hand figure, 849.3 gigatons, they're sitting on their lands in terms of biomass and underneath the biomass on more carbon that's in the atmosphere itself. In other words, there's more down below and above the ground where they manage the land still, than there is up in the atmosphere. Such a critical population and area of land to protect. This is improved rice production, improves rice cultivation. There's two ways to do it to reduce methane emissions by about 50%. And both methods increase productivity and profits and cost less than the existing methods. So there's no cost, there is savings. This is onshore wind, which is the number 2 solution. And again, and we wanted to show imagery. I'm going to show you the offshore. This is offshore wind. We wanted to show imagery that broke the stereotype of what we see again and again about solutions. We see this wind turbine on a green grassy hill with wildflowers and children playing, with daisy chains at the bottom of the hill in a blue sky and going, oh wow, that's so great, it's our energy future. That's a terrible place to put a wind turbine. This is where you want to put wind turbines where the weather is really crappy and pissy and it's really blowing and you don't really want to live there. This is the Sheringham Shoal in Norfolk, and these are 3 megawatt Siemens offshore wind turbines. So, and this is an Uru woman in Lake Titicaca. She's grinning. Why is she grinning? She's grinning because she lives on a straw island in a straw hut with her 2 daughters, and up to that moment she used kerosene to light up her daughters, the hut at night so her daughters could do homework. And so this really underlines a point that I think if you look at the book and look at the solution, you go to the website, you don't have to buy the book, but 98 of the 100 solutions are no-regret solutions. They have so many co-benefits that if there was not a climate scientist alive today and we were clueless as to what extreme weather is being caused by, we would want to do these solutions. Absolutely. So you don't have to have a position about climate change or global warming in order to want to do things, because they affect water, health, children, the future, jobs, prosperity, well-being. I mean, they go right on down the line in terms of making this a better world. And so this is rooftop solar. Normally we see, an 8 kilowatt array on a double, triple garage somewhere in the suburbs and go, oh, this is really cool. It's not cool. That's kind of renewable materialism. And we're really talking about really reimagining how we live and how much energy we use in the world. This is a really interesting one. Women smallholders, what are they doing in climate solutions? These are smallholders, means 5 acres or less. Over 70% of the food in the world is produced by smallholders. About 25% is produced by big ag. Now, I don't know about you, but ever since I was little, I've been told again and again, unless we go to big ag, the world is going to starve, right? I mean, that's been the thing. It's like, you may not like it, but it's better than starvation. And you may not like genetically modified seeds, but it's better than starvation. You may not like glyphosate, but cool it, this is how it works. Well, let's just stop there for a minute. What does big ag produce? It produces basically cancer, stroke, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and heart attacks, because it produces pork, beef, basically hydrogenated fats, sugar, and basically the soy and corn is fed to animals, which basically together, you put together. And I guess Jeremy said it this morning, I mean, it's right there with transport being the biggest source of global emissions in the world is our food production system, okay? So what do women have to do with it? A lot, because 40% of the smallholders are women. Do the math, they produce more food than big ag. And their food isn't poisonous. And if they are given the support, seeds, tools, training, tenure that men have, they outproduce men by a considerable margin. And what happens is you get a rapid reduction in what we call avoided deforestation, and you get less deforestation because they do it better. So this has a big impact. And again, what we saw with Drawdown, we're measuring solutions, is what we call wild cards, like who knew? But again, we just did math. We didn't go in there. We actually had biases. If you had asked us to say, what do you think the top 5, 10 solutions would be? We would have written them down and we would have been dead wrong. This is forest protection, which is the other side of indigenous people's land management. I dare say these forests were managed by indigenous people, but they're not there now for obvious reasons. But again, you see that figure on the bottom right-hand corner. More CO2 than is in the atmosphere. Very important. This is the Kermode bear in the Great Bear Forest in British Columbia. And this is the number 4 solution, plant, we don't say based, we say rich. Plant-rich diet. And this basically models the world protein content going down where we're over-consuming it in the north or west, the rich countries. We're consuming almost twice as much protein per day than is healthy for us, not to mention the planet. And it increases the amount of protein that those places in the world where they're nutritionally deficient in protein, we increase it to 50, 55 grams. So it goes down to 55 grams in, say, so-called developed countries and increases it where there's insufficient protein with a liberal amount of plant-based protein, and it's a number 4 solution. This is regenerative agriculture. This is so interesting because if you go from Saskatchewan right down through Texas, there is a regenerative ag movement. And every single farmer I've met, except in Saskatchewan because they can't vote in the U.S., I'm sure voted, we didn't talk about it, for Donald Trump. In other words, they are red as red staters get, and yet they are all over this solution because they know they got sold a bill of goods by chemical industrial agriculture, and they've seen their soil go downhill, their productivity go down, their bills go up, their inputs go up, the sickness and disease in their family and the cancers go up, and they're going, I've had enough of it. And they now are going to regen agriculture. They're selling off their discs, their plows. They're not tilling their land. They're using complex cover crops. They're using animals in rotation that is different than pasturage, and complex also rotations, not just corn, soy, corn, soy, corn, soy. And their productivity is going up. Their costs are going down. It's no input. For many of them now, there's no inputs. No fertilizer, no pesticides, no herbicides, nothing. The fertilization is being created by life itself. And these guys are sold. Their profits are going up, their resiliency is going up, water retention is going up. What's wrong with this picture? And if you ask any one of them in the US, why don't more farmers do this? And they'll say, because it's crop insurance. Crop insurance, USDA crop insurance, requires that you use chemical agriculture. Otherwise, they won't insure you. It's like insurance company in your house, well, we won't insure you if you don't have sprinklers. That makes sense, okay? But in agriculture, it's like unless you go with industry, you don't have any insurance. So it makes it hard for these farmers to make that transition. You know, they get off the chemicals, get off their dope. You know, their land is addicted to it. And what Gabe said is so interesting. Gabe Brown, who's in North Dakota, he said, my land doesn't have more fertility than the land over there that's industrially farmed. My land has fertility that's bioavailable because my soil is alive. And it's such an interesting concept, you know, about ecology. And this is food waste, number 3 solution. Astonishing amount of food is wasted, 40 to 50% in this country alone. Worldwide, it's different. In poorer countries, it's because the supply chain the cold chain isn't operative. They lose it at the farm or on the way to the city. We lose it mostly in our home and restaurants and hotels and conference centers. Did you see how many plates were not, today? I did. I watched the number of plates that were not finished. Maybe you didn't. A lot of them, you took food and you didn't eat it all. Why? Don't do that. Never again. Please. It's just, it dishonors everybody before it came to you. The cooks, the chefs, the farmers, everybody. Like they work, it finally gets to your plate, it's beautiful food, and you throw it away. How would you feel? How does the planet feel? It feels really bad. And because all this energy has gone into the food. And what this does not measure is what happens when the food is thrown away and it's landfilled and is in an anaerobic environment, creating methanogenesis. Methane is 28 to 34 times more powerful than CO2, and that is not measured in this solution because we couldn't get enough data worldwide. This is a global thing. You add that, this goes up by double at least. And this is a household recycling. And this is beautiful woman is Dasanak from Ethiopia, who basically is getting her sisters in the village are going across this river where they're building a bridge to the bar in the morning to get everything the men throw away and making jewelry and ornaments. And now they're selling it to boutiques in France. So anyway, I didn't want to show a blue bin on this one, so try it. And then we have in the book 20 coming attractions, and why? Coming attractions, we don't have the data. You don't see any data there. There isn't scientific data yet or sufficient. There isn't economic data yet. It's insufficient. What we want to convey is that humanity is on the case. This isn't a situation where, let's put it this way, Washington is not emblematic of what's happening in this country or the world. Not at all. And not only are those solutions that we measured extant and scaling, the first 80, the next 20 give you a sense of the brilliance and the imagination of humanity right now in terms of solutions that are coming. It's like these are coming, they're over the horizon, and they're extraordinary in their impact. This one, Dr. Brian Van Herzen, a plasma physicist from Princeton, discovered basically flying over Greenland at the request of a glaciologist friend to count melt ponds in 2001. And so he counted kind of roughly what he was seeing, and then he flew over to Europe every year on his Cessna 337. And he said, and 2 years later, there was like melt lakes. They weren't ponds anymore. And then it was a really big lake, and he could see within 5 years the rate of melting occurring on the Greenland ice sheet, and he changed his whole career and devoting it to basically restoring life on Earth. And what he invented here was structures made of recycled PET, which when placed into underneath the water, sufficient so that tankers and boats can go over them, with tubes that go down to the cold thermocline, 200, 300 feet, that are self-actuating in terms of pumping up that cold, nutrient-laden water. And you do that within weeks, you get phytoplankton, zooplankton, you get algae, you get kelp, you get feeder fish, forage fish, you get the whole life, you get life, you get the food chain. It starts up all by itself. Just create the conditions. And what happens is it deacidifies the water, it cools the water, it can reverse coral bleaching, it can produce millions and billions of tons of protein. Fish can be placed along fisheries on coasts where it's been fished out, I mean, the benefits go on and on and on. There is no downside to this. 99% of the tropical oceans are now marine deserts. They're dead. You like to dive and the water's clear. The water's clear because there's no nutrients in that water. And so this is about taking the oceans and using the principles of life to restore life. Because as Janine Benyus said, what does life do? Life creates the conditions that are conducive to life. That's what life does. Your life, by the way. Your life. That's what we're here to do. That's why we came. We're here on Earth now. Why? To create the conditions that are conducive to life. We don't have to go to anybody for our mission statement. We know it. It's innate. It's who we are. And this is what this technology does. And this is the same thing. Repopulating the mammoth steppe, two Siberian, Russian, basically, biologists said, basically, we bring back the animals that were extirpated 12,500 years ago in the subarctic circle. They do something very interesting during the winter, which is they brush away the snow to get at the dead browse underneath. And that reduces the temperature of the soil by 2 degrees Celsius, which is a permafrost protection plan. It's beautiful. So the reindeer, not just the reindeer, but the muskox, not just the muskox, but there used to be wolves up there, the Yakutian horses, the elk and so forth. I mean, we can't bring back the woolly mammoth, but maybe we can. But pretty much we can bring back every single animal that we extirpated or some variant thereof to the subarctic circle. And this is, we talk about buildings, Terry Bob talked about buildings and high-rise and so forth. These are buildings made of wood. I mean, completely wood. No steel, no concrete. Yale University said if we built our buildings over 6 stories, by the way, with wood instead of steel and concrete, it would have reduced emissions by 14 to 31%. I didn't buy the 31, but I buy the 14%. Steel and concrete is 11% of our emissions alone. And these buildings are as safe or safer than steel and concrete buildings. I remember last year, remember the Torch Tower in Dubai? Well, it burned up for the second time. It's a bad name. I would rename it the Torch Tower. Because CLT, these laminated beams, which are made of small pieces of wood, can be made from wood from afforestation, that is, putting trees where trees had never been before, or not been there for so long, we don't know that there was a forest there. But these glue lamps do not burn. They char in a fire, but they don't burn. They can't. They just char, and then the fire goes on. So anyway, they're very safe, and they're very beautiful. There is now, in planning in London, a 1,000-foot, 90-story wooden building going up. I mean, it's so beautiful when you see the plans for it. And the last one here is a cow walks onto a beach. And again, the best science is observational science, in my opinion. Sometimes the science that comes out of a lab is a little scary. Darwin was an observational scientist. Wallace was, I mean, it's like you're out in the world and you're saying, how does this work? And what's going on here? And from there you start to, arrive at hypotheses and theories, and you test them out, but you're actually looking how life works. And in this case, a farmer in Prince Edward Island basically wanted to know why he got more milk production from cows that were eating kelp, because he's right there on the beach. And he finally asked somebody, a county agent who got a scientist to help, Rob Fairley, and said it had to do something with methane production, because methane is such an inefficient metabolic process. The rumen, in ruminants, wasn't always populated by bacteria that produced methane. That came later. That was an opportunistic land grab by certain bacteria, okay? It's ubiquitous, okay, now, but there's nothing inherent in ruminants that need to basically make methane. It doesn't do anything for anybody, not us and not for the animal itself. And so they tested it by splitting the herd and putting plastic bags over their head and measuring exhalations for 5 times a day. And sure enough, the cows that ate kelp produced less methane. And so that was what you call a science project. Not much use for that one, but interesting. But that scientist heard of a scientist in Queensland who was doing the same work, and together they discovered a marine algae called Asparagopsis taxiformis, which, in fed as a 2% supplement to ruminants, reduces methane emissions by 70 to 90%. And so I'm not saying oh great, let's have CAFOs, confined area feeding operations for animals. I think that's inhumane and awful. But it does say that we know how to address this in a serious, meaningful way in a meaningful time frame. And remember, marine permaculture, they're talking together to figure out how to adapt marine permaculture to produce Asparagopsis taxiformis, which, is just a kind of a wonderful symmetry. What surprised us? Everything. The solutions. Like I said, if you had asked me to write the top 5, I would have been wrong except for one of them, completely wrong. And what's so interesting is that, and I have to tell you the story, is that before we were finished publishing the book, but we got the data in February this year, and we were looking at it and this and that, and one of our advisors called, who has 30 years experience, published professor, IPCC lead author, wonderful human being, and said, how's it going? I said, wow, the solutions came out. We're just so surprised. I said, I don't think anybody in the world knows the top 5 solutions to reversing global warming. And she said, anyone? I said, yeah, Christiana Figueres, Al Gore, Jeffrey Sachs, Bill Kevin, Jim Hansen. I don't think, we didn't know, that's for dang sure, but I don't think anybody knew. And she said, what are they? And I said, you tell me. I said, okay. And then I could hear her talking, well, be rapid transit, no, be EVs, and she was like kind of going through her little, mental computer about it, and then she said, okay, here they are, not in order, just the top 5 in any order. And she said, how did I do? And I said, that wasn't the point of the question. She said, well, what was the point of the question? I said, you are probably one of the 100, 200, I don't know, people in the world who knows most about climate change, has studied it the longest, is most respected, and look how long it took you to come up with any 5. So if that's true for you, what about the rest of the world? I mean, Dina Main talked about an intelligent era, okay, bringing intelligence to problems. Well, we have never done this before. We have never done the math on the 100 top solutions to reversing global warming. It's never happened. It's crazy. I can't tell you why. Anyway, she said, well, okay, how did I do, though? I said, they're all wrong. And I did it with 2 more IPCC lead authors or advisors, and one of them got 1 right. So 1 out of 15 guesses was correct, right? And I am not even saying we're correct, by the way. I could tell you and show you how you could change the model or change the assumptive inputs, like on methane production from food waste and so forth, that would change the order. But they're approximately right, and we have nothing on being right. We are totally transparent. Our models are open. Our inputs are basically from the most respected institutions. This is what we know, and what surprised us was food is number 1. Number 1. Why? Because food is the biggest source along with transport of emissions, but if done properly can sequester CO2. So it's a twofer. There's very few solutions. Land use is one too. That's a twofer. It goes both ways. Electrical generation, you saw, is number 2. Not all. This is not liquid fuels. This is electrical generation. Now, if you look at materials and buildings, you can't see it on the right side there, but I mean transport and buildings and cities, they seem smaller because the solutions are everywhere in other places, in materials especially. You have to put them together in some ways, including electrical generation. The top solution was refrigerant management, which we were very disappointed in. That's so unsexy. And how can we lead with that? It's not a good lead. But it's basically the refrigerants that are used today are 1,000 to 9,000 times more powerful than CO2. And these don't look very well on this slide. But number 2, you can't even see the whole slide on this. That's too bad. But anyway, if you take onshore and offshore wind, it would be number 1. You can't see that on this slide. This is the number 6 solution, educating girls. And why? Yeah. There's so many reasons that we should support the education of girls and boys. But what we measured was the impact on climate, and the impact comes from the fact that girls are yanked out of school at pre-puberty or at puberty to go to work to put their brothers through school, or their early marriage, or for a lot of reasons that are traditional, historical, cultural, religious, so-called religious. And when that happens, they have an average of 5+ children, and they are kind of down in the hole economically because they haven't finished their education. They have a lot of children. They have health issues themselves if they're getting pregnant at 13 or 14. And it's a sort of a spiral, a vicious cycle that repeats itself. If she is allowed to complete her education, supported to get to basically a high school equivalent, then she has an average of 2+ children. Her children benefit from her education. There's more resources go into them. They do better. They repeat their mother's behavior. And you have the difference, which you see here is 59.6 gigatons. Basically is you have a form of family planning, but it's not about, she's planning her family. That's the difference. She is deciding what she wants to do and who she wants to be. This is a very different thing than being yanked out of school when you're 13, 12 years old. And this combined with, well, family planning, which is the number 7 solution, you can reverse them, is basically clinics available worldwide to support women's reproductive well-being, health, and choices. And you put them together, and 6 and 7, and they are the number 1 solution to reversing global warming, is the empowerment of girls and women. And again, who knew? You would think, when you listen to Al Gore, who I respect tremendously, it's basically solar, solar, wind, solar, solar, wind, Elon Musk, and don't eat so many burgers, and we're good to go, right? And we'll get a hall pass to the 22nd century. That's just not true. Don't say anything, but I'm saying it is not true. And those are crucial solutions, so I'm not in any way taking away from their importance. They're just not true. And so this is basically a meaningless slide because of this is basically a pie chart, and there is no such thing as a small solution. You see some are bigger, of course, but a system-caused climate change. It's a system that heals it. So please do not think if you're working on something that is on basically the left side of that pie chart, or not even on the pie chart, by the way, it's critically important. You can't get there without all these solutions. You can't get to drawdown with just the top 10 or 20 or 30 solutions. The 80-20 rule applies here. This is what came out of it, the book. Some of you have it. I've signed a few copies. The title, what Chris talked about, the most comprehensive plan, was basically not our subtitle when we started. It was proposed by somebody at the publisher. I rejected that, said that's too brash a subtitle. But finally I thought it's true because it is the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, because no one's ever proposed one. Right? And we didn't propose the plan. You did. This is your plan. We did the math. We don't know. What we're saying is there's a collective intelligence in humanity that we don't see, that it's hidden, it's suppressed by the news cycle and the media and infantilized presidents and so forth. I mean, we don't see it. It doesn't come up. It doesn't make the news. And this is not helpful. And so we're trying to be helpful and saying, you know, together, we actually think we know what we're doing. We do. We know what we're doing. Is there enough in time? All that sort of stuff? Well, that's a good question. Are we accelerating fast enough? Good question. Do we need a carbon tax basically to accelerate these solutions? Absolutely. Nothing, no policy would do more for accelerating these solutions than carbon taxes. But what we see there, and what you didn't see in the slide, is that we can reverse global warming by 2050. We can reverse it by 2045 if we go to 100% renewable energy by then. We can even reverse it by 2040, by the way. There's a movie coming out in 2040 by Damon Gamone in Australia, and he asked us if we could do it, and actually it gets easier in some ways because you have less emissions to counter in 2040 than you do in 2050. And lastly, I just want to talk about language. And I've touched on it, but we are using war and sometimes sports metaphors basically to talk about something that is sacred, which is the earth, the atmosphere, climate, weather. This is part of a living system. This is extraordinary. And we're basically saying we should fight change. That's really intelligent. I mean, it's like saying fight human change or fight biological change. The climate is supposed to change. So let's stop fighting that one. What we're supposed to do is transform our behavior down here on Earth. That's what we're supposed to do, and not fight and combat. Look at that word, climate crusade. It's used, crusades. Does anybody read history here? Not here, but come on. That's not a term we want to use. You know, slashing emissions with our machetes. Well, I mean, come on. You know, this idea that we have to overcome, you know, bespeaks of a mindset that says that the atmosphere is other. It's other, not us, it's other. And we gotta basically beat it down, fix it, fight it, combat it. It's like that's the disease, that's the mental disease that caused the problem. That there's an other place in this, that there's other genders, other races, other people, other places that we can put shit in the ocean, you know, and it's cool, don't worry, it's big. This whole idea that there's other on Earth is the problem that got us, the thinking that got us into this situation. It will not get us out. The intentions are good when people use this language, but we get trapped into the same thinking that's causal instead of curative. What we've done is talk about the probability of what's going to go wrong over and over and over again, instead of the possibility of what we can do given the impeccable, extraordinary science and problem statement. Once we know the problem statement, do we need to keep rolling around it over and over and over again? I had retrievers when I lived on a farm. We had horses. My retrievers used to roll around in the horse shit for reasons I have no idea why. We have to hose them off at night so they could go into the house. We're rolling around in the silence and the science of disaster. We got the problem statement. Got it. Let's work on the solutions. Do we have time to keep going over and over, rinse and repeat about how bad things are and how fast they're getting worse? We can do that. But how do you feel? Where does that go? Where does that take humanity? Not very far. And so finally, again, the last thing, 2 degrees Celsius, 2C, you see at the bottom. How often do you hear that? A lot. Science-based target, right? Really? Are you sure? It's not. That was pulled out of thin air by Joachim Schellenberger in 1994 in Germany for the German ministry because they had a hard time understanding climate science. So he said, I'll make it simple. We can't go past 2 degrees Celsius. They said, oh, good, got it, thanks. That's where it came from. Now, it may be true. Let's say it's true. Let's say it is true. 4:50 p.m., 2C, got it. How does that communicate to the rest of the world? 99+ % of the people in the world are disengaged on climate change. Totally disengaged. Why? Is that their fault? Or is that about how we are communicating? It's about how we're communicating. We are communicating in such a way to guarantee that people be disengaged. That's what's happening. So you have a woman in Botswana, you have a bricklayer in Belgium, okay? You have a taxi driver in Tokyo, and you say, 2C. Huh? It has no meaning whatsoever. 2C is a future existential threat. We're saying, beyond that, if we go there, something terrible is going to happen in the future. The human mind, the human brain is not wired to respond to future existential threat. The human beings that used to be worried about the future aren't in the gene pool anymore. They aren't your ancestors. The ones who were here came from people who responded to existing existential threat. Right now, war, food, security, etc. That's who we became. That's how we became who we became. That's just the way it is. And by basically keeping talking about future existential threat, we guarantee that basically humanity is tuned out. And the way to tune into humanity is to respond to needs, human needs. And the climate movement is not seen as responding to human needs. Of course, the Sustainable Development Goals are, but those are goals, right? And they're generalized, and they're wonderful, and they overlap perfectly with these solutions. But basically, the back door to humanity we keep knocking on is locked. And the front door is wide open. And basically, we have to understand that the way to reverse global warming is to basically implement regenerative development. And that's what these 98 solutions are, which is to regenerate our cities, towns, waters, oceans, lands, farms, people, health, etc. This is how we go, not about haranguing people about what's going to happen in the future if we don't do something. And we are the only species without full employment. Think about that. All other 10 million are fully engaged every day, but we've discovered a way to make people feel really bad about themselves and to marginalize them, say, you know, you're not really necessary. And if any time they act it out by selling dope or doing something, we put them in the prison industrial complex and call that an industry. Okay. Is that really how we're going to solve this situation? We need to create a world where there's more jobs than people, not more people than jobs. And we have an economy that's degenerative development, which basically it's stealing the future, selling it in the present, and calling it GDP and congratulating itself, and then basically putting in tax shelters offshore. And all I'm saying is that regenerative development is the opposite, which is we can make an economy that heals the future. We can sell that in the present and call that GDP and do it in such a way that we provide what humanity needs, which is living wage, dignified, purposeful jobs that give people a sense of self-respect and make them respected by their children, by their families, and by their communities, and give them a sense of meaning in this world. And if there is never any time in the history of the world where we needed people to have a sense of meaning, it is now. And we cannot provide that if we keep using scientific, climatological parlance to harangue people about the future instead of addressing human need. We're talking about future human suffering, and what we've got to address is the suffering that people are experiencing right now. That's the... This was one of our scientific advisors. Spoiler alert, he came back. Quickly, Andy Weir's book, The Martian, this was a metaphor. Did you get that? I mean, he is on Mars. Basically, it's a closed-loop system. He's got his own atmosphere. He's growing potatoes in his own poop. Okay, not exactly what we should do here, but nevertheless, the principle applies, which is a closed-loop system. Then he blows out his atmosphere, right? I mean, and his global cooling there. But the point being is that it was really a metaphor for what we're doing. We don't get that it's a closed-loop system here. You do when you're just struggling to survive on Mars. But what does he say at the end of the movie, which is so instructive? He says, basically, listen up to wannabe astronauts. Listen up, because this could save your life. When you're up there, do you think you're going to die? Absolutely. It's going to happen to you. You are going to think you're going to die. It happened to me. It's going to happen to you. And that's kind of where we are right now. And he said, what do you do then? He said, what you do, he said, you can either accept that or you can do the math. And you solve one problem, and you solve another problem, and if you solve enough problems, you get to come home. Right? And that's really what we're talking about. Let's come home. Right? This excursion of humanity to where we are right now, interesting, but let's come home, right? And we do that by not dividing ourselves, not by polemics, not by polarization, not by blaming, not by demonizing. Somebody asked me once, like, what do you say to people who deny climate change? I said, nothing at all. I just listen. Just listen. When's the last time you want somebody to change your mind? They don't want us to change your mind. Leave it alone. Act, do, show. It's like when we were children. Which sandbox did you want to play in? Where they're having fun. So let's have fun. Let's celebrate. Let's do it joyously. Let's celebrate what we know, how we are doing it, and let's stop feeling like victims. It doesn't work. You know, what works is feeling like winners, and we are winners because we're on the side of life, and we know that. And thank you, all of you, for what you're doing, I say, I am not telling something you don't know. I'm describing what you do know and what you are doing. And all I'm doing and what we're doing at Project Drawdown is connecting it up to you can see that there is a we that is supremely intelligent and gracious and wants to restore life on earth. Thank you so much. Really, thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we have about 20 minutes, and as I promised, this is the one session where we're going to have a live Q&A. So if you want to raise your hand if you have a couple of questions, we'll keep on track. Then at 5 o'clock, we are going to leave this room. We're going to head up to the Key West Ballroom, which is just upstairs, for cocktails. So Paul, you got 20 minutes before cocktails, but I think, Paul, you're going to join us.
Yes.
I think Governor Martin O'Malley, you're going to join us. Samantha, Mark, some of our other speakers.
Laura.
We'll all be up there. Laura, you're going to be there?
Yeah. She gave up the dogs, remember?
Wonderful, that's right. Yep. Yeah, and I have to stay neutral between you and Scott. I'm sorry. And then just in case I forget to tell you at the end of the day, at 5:45, our friends from Siemens are offering tours of their innovation lab, which is here on the UCF campus. It's about a 10-minute walk from the student union, and so we will coordinate anyone that wants to join them for those tours up in that Key West ballroom. So now, please, open for questions.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, Dave Finnegan from here in Florida. If we have additional suggestions and solutions that we want to bring to Project Drawdown that haven't yet been considered, is there a mechanism established for us to do that?
Yes, you can write in. Just to know what we did consider, we started with 300 solutions. So, and we winnowed them down by impact. And so if your favorite solution is not there, it might not have made it when we did the math. The other thing, we get a lot of people wanting to do solutions which are what we call futuristic, put it that way. In other words, why don't you talk about that, you know? We got people from CCL is here, say, why didn't you include a carbon tax? Because it's not a solution, it's a policy. So we're very clear about what we do, and we have to stick to that. And if we don't have peer-reviewed data, we don't do it, for example. And so, but we gather it all, every single suggestion and input from people who write to us on the website. We gather it all. Second edition comes out in the spring 2019, and it will have some new solutions, and the rankings change because of improvement of the models. So we welcome it, and very, very much.
Okay. Hi, my name is Douglas.
Hi, Doug.
Locally, we do the Pachamama Alliance. You're familiar with that? You speak on the Pachamama Alliance. Could you tell us, in your impression, the importance of the message from the indigenous cultures to us about the sacredness of the living earth?
It's interesting when you study indigenous language. In other words, it's hard to, but there are a few dictionaries, actually, that are very, very good. And when I wrote Blessed Unrest, I read one dictionary, all 30,000 words, the Yamana dictionary. And it's so beautiful because this culture in Tierra del Fuego, with 30,000 words, which is just about a little less than Japanese, by the way, has more verbs than English, which has 3 million words, okay? And, but what's interesting is the language was metaphorical, too. And so depression was a crab molting its shell, but not completely molted the shell yet, in other words. So that was a word for depression. But what you discover in that language is that there is semantically no separation between the cosmological, the metaphysical, the biological, the spiritual, the physiological. And it's hard for us to get that because we have an explicit language that separates, and that's why we're so good scientifically and engineering and so many other ways. We really get those distinctions. And our language is explicit. Indigenous languages tend to be implicit, which means they don't actually make those separations. And so for them to say, almost what you said, they can't really say that in their language because it already sounds like the sacred is other. You know, it's other than this, and we should include the sacred and think of it as sacred. And whereas in their language, it's integrated, and they would look at us if they were honest and say, "That's so odd," you know, see it that way. So anyway, Pachamama Alliance is doing great stuff. Yes, sir.
Hi, Alexander Golding from Help to Help LLC and the Executive Director of the Florida Impact Investing Initiative. I was curious to follow on to that communication piece that you just mentioned, and also when you asked your fellow scientists if they could come up with the top 5 solutions or explain it in a succinct way, and they couldn't. Do you have a narrative plan or some sort of promotions or marketing plan to be able to take this and put it into some sort of easily digestible and widely distributable content, such as Another Inconvenient Truth or something of that nature? Are you in talks with participants, anyone else?
Yeah, we do.
You.
Thank you. Or at least, the world does, put it that way. The Vulcan Productions is producing a TV series for Netflix. There's going to be a long-form documentary. There's going to be short-form media. There's going to be curriculum. There's going to be NGSS curriculum development with short-form videos. There's going to be 50 change makers videos, which is people who are actually doing it. I noticed you said impact investment, which is a little, we are, I don't know how many family funds, impact investment funds, and philanthropies that have come to us, and that's a collaboration. We do is we collaborate. We do not tell the world what to do. We don't like that. We like the world. We think the world knows what to do, but it does it better when it's connected to others. We learn better as a group than we do as an individual. And so it's probably $100 billion of money that is connected to us right now that is looking at it from the point of view of risk assessment, but also really more importantly in terms of how to fund fast-growing or companies that need growth capital that address reversing global warming. There is a $500 million drawdown fund being created right now, and which is going to make investments in the first quarter. We've only been out since April, so this has happened very quickly. We have partnerships. Partnership means it's just a collaboration. It's not like we are a node in that partnership. We're not the center. With 10 universities in the world who have the models. We talked to Chandra here, or I think he's still here. There he is, from UCF as being the 11th university, where the models we have actually are in that university where the students then can use it, the graduate students, they can use it to model what's going on locally. They can create models for, say, Florida, so they can basically regionalize it to make it applicable and used for benchmarking, measuring, and progress. Also, they can change it, the inputs, they can modify it. Then also, because there's more intelligence, then the whole model gets better, and we have maybe UCF, but I hope so, but we definitely have Georgia Tech, and we have MIT, we have Penn State, Northwestern, University of Washington, ANU in Canberra, we have Terry in Hyderabad, Imperial College in London, UC Davis, Berkeley. And so that's just what we've done, becoming a shared model, curated so that the core model stays very tight in the sense of how it changes and so forth, but it doesn't matter because that one can always be modified, amended, changed, and adapted and applied in a way that makes sense to that university or to that region, locale. And then we have faith-based groups that are coming together on how teaching and how to instruct it. We have a curriculum partnership that's coming together. which is how to teach it. We have it being taught now from 4th grade. It's so charming, the 4th grade curriculum for Drawdown. It's like, it just, I mean, only a 4th grade teacher could come up with a 4th grade curriculum. I mean, you know, who knows what 4th graders think and act like. But, so that's happening. I can go on and on, but that's what's happening is Drawdown is basically creating self-organizing groups like Pachamama Alliance, which has taken on Drawdown all over this country and other countries, and teaching it and enacting it, enabling it. We have a Drawdown Nova Scotia now, which is, again, they did it themselves. You know, NGOs, the city, the provincial government, the colleges, universities, the schools, the churches, artists. We like STEAM better than STEM, but we think art is really important. Part of understanding everything, the world. And they're committed to reversing emissions by 2025 in the province of Nova Scotia. So that's what we're seeing all over the world. It's going into a Finnish edition, which they're going to modify for Nordic countries. It's going into different editions in different countries, where they're going to, which is what we wanted to. It's a global book, but it needs to be specific to a culture. And we're just hanging on, doing the best we can to meet basically the demand and requests that come to us for different ways to use, apply, teach, understand, learn, improve, which we definitely want, you know, the models all over the world. Because I think the world has been really hungry for something like this for a long time, which is, got the problem, thank you. What do I do? What do I do? I need to know what to do. And I think people need a list that's more comprehensive. And what we're going to do on the website is, people think that, well, I can do the food thing, I can do that thing. But actually, virtually, with a couple exceptions, individuals can influence every single one of those solutions. So I can have an educate thing. I want to know more, and we'll have, besides our references, how you can know more, whether it's videos or docs or this or that. I want to do something, which is activate. I want to do something. And whether it's offshore wind or this or that, what you can do specifically to activate that solution, so that this idea of what can I do, which is, you know, usually the call to action, write to your local, write to your congressperson, that's great. But really the call to action, I think, has been misused, because it implies that something you can do, and what we're saying is, it's a we, it's a we, it always was a we, it always will be a we. You know, there's no such thing as an individual. That's taught to us. We learn it, but we have to become a we in order to actually do this. And the only way we as an organization can make sense of it for ourselves is to do what we did, which is to be a we, and collaborate, and then work with the world in the same way. And so that's how we're going to get it out, and in all the different forms, and any other form that people suggest. Anyway, thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, Charlie Behrens from here in Orlando. First, I just want to say what an honor it is to have you visit us here in Orlando.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you very much. And thanks, Douglas, for mentioning Pachamama Alliance, one of my true loves. We have a rather unique problem here in Orlando. We're only a few minutes away from one of the largest cattle ranches in the world.
Yeah.
And that poisons our whole economic system around here, both, you know, financially and politically. And it makes it really hard for us to move off of animal agriculture in this region. And I was wondering if you have observed in other regions where there are strong animal agriculture industries, what people have done to help get off that whole train, that poisonous train.
I think the term should be get on. How do you get them onto a system that's regenerative instead of the one that you're describing? And what I would suggest, there's a great guy up in Georgia in White Plains. There's some other people who are doing such innovative things who were, yeah, Ben. Yes, yes. And talk to Laura because she knows him. But I mean, just saying is that who come from that place that the industry is here. Okay, they come from that place. And they've made the transition. That's where there's credibility, not from you, not from me, by the way, it's from their peers. And when their peers talk peer-to-peer about why they did it the way they did, which is what you're describing here, and why they do it the way they're doing it now, and what happened in terms of productivity, vet bills, human health, cow health, land health, water retention, which is very, very important, by the way. And, you know, it's so beautiful. Look at Peter Bick's stuff from Carbon Nation. You can go online and see that one. You have these farmers. It's so beautiful, you know, saying, yeah, this kid came with it was a baseball cap and tennis shoes and tried to tell me what to do, and I don't listen to kids in baseball caps and tennis shoes, you know. This guy's farmer, and this is like 14 years after he said, but the bank came and said we have to sell all equipment. And I listened to that kid in the baseball cap and the tennis shoes, and this is like years and years later, and he said, see that there, we used to kill that, and now it's fodder, and the vet bills have gone down 90%, and we saved the farm, and we're making more money than we ever have before, and blah, blah, blah. That, you want to get that farmer to farmer, or rancher to rancher, cattleman conversation going, and never, ever go to them in the sense of making them defensive. That's why I say get on. Let's get on, not get off. And because you need animals to regenerate, restore land. You take animals off the land goes south. So which animals, how many, in which way, those are the questions and those are the issues. And I feel like that's the way in. I don't know the way in terms of people or managers or owners and so forth. You need a kind of a Laura Seidel type person, you know, and around Orlando who has those contacts and things like that. But that's how you do it. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I have one more question.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
This is Michelle Suarez
Hi,
in the
Michelle.
back.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm a community organizer in Orlando. And I just want to say I'm so glad that you mentioned, you know, like gender justice and including women. And you also mentioned issues that have been impacting people of color for so long. So you mentioned like the prison industrial complex and, you know, just like so many things that are impacting our people. So thank you for that. I guess my question is, how is racial justice how is racial justice being incorporated into the research? I mean, of course, we know that there is an intersection. We do know that environmental racism, you know, is real, and, you know, people of color have been bearing the burden of environmental injustices. So can you talk a little bit more about that, or is that something that maybe requires more research? Will that be incorporated in the future?
A couple things. Thank you for the question and the statement. First of all, it's interesting because I was at University of Santa Cruz, University of California at Santa Cruz, and I gave pretty much the same presentation you saw about educating girls in family planning, and the professor asked, I think it was the first question, said, yeah, but how do we control population? I love that. I said, lose the verb, control. And the verb is empower. And that goes all the way around, which is what we don't do research on policy, we don't do research on social justice. We don't do that. We're very clear what we do and try to do well. Having said that as I try to make clear, the economic, we have a book coming out called Regeneration. That's the one that addresses marginalization of everything, people, place, water. I mean, it's the same mindset, the marginalization or the othering of people, which is what we do so well in this country. That's where we integrate that, because that's not about a solution, it's about process. And so regeneration is a process, and it incorporates the solutions or integrates them, but therefore we're not modeling, you know, in a sense, using peer-reviewed literature and all that sort of stuff. We're actually describing the integrated processes, which then address economic injustice, racial injustice, social marginalization, and et cetera. So it's not, we don't see it as the issue, we see it as a solution. In other words, it's like, this is a wasteful culture. And what we've done is create a culture that wastes people. It wastes them. You can call it, there's other words for it, but I mean, which are also true. And what we're saying is that zero waste means the really empowerment and honoring of us, and us excludes no one. And that's how we get there. And I just think that has also been lost in the focus on clean energy, renewable energy is true, but where do you fit in that? When you hear it, you just feel like, okay, yes, good, right, but right now I'm dealing with injustice and social marginalization, and it's amplified now in the last 12 months too. I mean, it's getting worse instead of better. But so I would just say yes, and we're going to try to address that in the next book, which is different than this one, because we want to stick to our knitting. When we say we're going to do something, we want to do it and not get out of, not try to do too much. When we say we're measuring and mapping and modeling the 100 most substantive solutions to reversing global warming, that's what we did. Now we want to go to process. And this came out really working with the Commonwealth of Nations, by the way, and which we do, the 52 nations, the Commonwealth. And what I had to do was learn how to communicate to all the other ministers, not the environmental minister, but the health, defense, housing, basically marine, all the other portfolios had to understand the benefits to their portfolio of these solutions. And out of that came this book, which you will see in a year or so, called Regeneration. And anyway, I should stop. Thank you. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you for taking.
Thank you all so much for sharing this meaningful day. I think one of the recurring themes that we heard is that, and I said this last night at our dinner, that individually we are one drop, but together we are a mighty ocean. And so we thank you not just for your time today, but for your passion, for your creativity, for your dedication to sustainability, and for all of the future work that you will do individually and that we will do collectively. So please, we invite you upstairs to the Key West Ballroom. I am going to ask the speakers to come up here. We're going to do the wedding thing and take some pictures. So I'm going to ask you to hold off on your questions for Paul and the governor and the other speakers until we're up in the Key West. We've got a lovely, some cocktails, appetizers, a flamenco guitarist. So head on up there. We'll meet you up there. And again, thank you for being here with us today.